Hi, welcome everyone. This is Emily from UHAB. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us this evening for the Planning Energy Efficiency Projects for your HDFC workshop. So we encourage you to turn your camera on if you are feeling like it. If you're not, no worries. But we do also encourage you to use the chat. If you just arrived, we're asking everyone to introduce yourself in the chat. You can include your name, your HDFC, how large the building is or how long you've lived there. Um, and and we'll get started. And people will be entering as we're going. A few announcements before we get into the presentation. Just if you need any technical assistance, please indicate that in the chat, and either myself or Ariel or Annika will be able to assist you. I also want to mention that UHAB has a job opening um, for a bilingual trainer position. So I'm going to place that in the chat if you're interested, or if there's anyone in your community that might be interested in that position, um, please look into that, encourage them to apply. We would really love to hire from within the HDFC community, and folks that have experience with HDFCs and are committed to affordable housing. So take a look at that. In the meantime, I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'll pass it to Ariel and Annika. So I'm Emily from UHAB. I'm with the Member Services Department. We have a number of cost-saving programs and tools for HDFC co-ops like yours, and really glad to be here. Ariel?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel. I work mostly in our development department, and also spread out across a couple different departments at UHAB, doing work with buildings that are starting to become co-ops, co-ops that are in need of preservation and technical assistance.
You muted yourself, Ariel.
Oh no, I got muted. I don't know where I got muted.
Right after you said preservation, actually.
Okay, the only other thing that I wanted to say is that I also work with Emily doing energy work, which is why I'm here tonight. So excited to speak with all of you, and I will now actually pass it on to Annika.
Hi, everyone. My name's Annika. I work for the nonprofit Solar One and the Here Comes Solar program. We're partnered with UHAB on the Co-ops Go Solar campaign. So I will be talking primarily about solar, and can help with any questions on that front.
Great, thanks Ariel and Annika. So if you've just arrived, we're asking everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. Let us know your name, what HDFC you're from, how long you've lived there. And I am going to just get us started with a poll. So if you can take a moment to just respond, hopefully you should see it on your screen. Give one more second. It looks like we're almost all there with voting. Great. And so can you see the results there? Looks like we have a pretty good distribution of folks from throughout the Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens. Wonderful. And so we're going to be talking this evening about planning energy projects for your HDFC. First, we'll talk about why energy efficiency, and Annika will give some context for that, and then I will talk about how your co-op may develop a comprehensive energy plan, and that really consists of 3 points: knowing what's in your building, your current building systems, knowing your compliance timeline, and then what resources are available to your HDFC. And then we'll pass it back to Annika, who will talk about some of the UHAB energy campaigns like Co-ops Go Solar, which we partner with Solar One on, which offers options for solar and community solar. And then Ariel will talk about our newly launched program, Clean Heat for Co-ops, and where to get started with energy planning. We do have Q&A at the end, but we are also going to, have some moments throughout the presentation where we stop and take questions. So we for that section, I think if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, or if you want to use the chat, please feel free to do that at the appropriate times. So just for those of you who've just arrived, please introduce yourself in the chat. But otherwise, please stay on mute unless you are speaking at the question sections. Just a little bit of background about UHAB and member services. Member services provides tools and support for HDFC cooperatives to sustain shareholders like yourselves in operating the co-op. We have many programs listed here to save money so that your co-op may remain affordable and financially solvent. And it's also a way to connect with and support other HDFCs citywide. And we offer training and programs and options like Co-ops Go Solar. This is one of our anchor energy programs. This is the first solar campaign in New York City to focus exclusively on connecting HDFCs with renewable technology through solar photovoltaic panels. And our goals are to increase awareness, increase energy efficiency in the HDFC community, and really sustain affordable co-ops. And Annika, if you'll.
Yeah, so I want to give some background about why UHAB and the Co-ops Go Solar program are focusing so much on energy programs. I think that there's a couple different things that really show it. First of all, it reduces costs for the co-ops in terms of operating the building systems, and that reduces the energy burden on the families who live in the co-ops, and also on the co-op itself, so that the co-op can last for years to come. But also it reduces energy consumption, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions and helps fight climate change. And as part of that, it can help to improve air quality in your neighborhood. And I'll go into a couple more details because I think it's really good to have a sense of why these things are so important. So any household that spends over 6% of their income on energy is considered energy burdened. But in 2020, a nationwide study found that Black households face a higher energy burden than white households at every position in the income distribution. And that's certainly true here in New York City. You can see the energy burden distributed throughout the city, and the zip codes that you would expect to be energy burdened based on the previous information are exactly that. And energy burden is directly related to these energy efficiency measures that we're talking about. High energy costs eat up income that could go to building improvements and any preventative maintenance. That's the idea of a stitch in time saves 9. If you can make those improvements, then it reduces your costs down the line and saves money for everyone. There's also the health impacts of it. So solar panels and energy efficiency as well can actually contribute to better air quality. If you look at those black dots on the map, those are what are called peaker plants. And those are very dirty oil-powered plants that are only turned on at the most intense, like the highest energy usage times of the year. And they contribute more to pollution than most other things in the city and at that time. And they only turn on when there's a lot of demand. So if we can reduce energy usage by increasing energy efficiency and by using solar, you can actually reduce the number of times that those peaker plants need to be turned on and improve air quality, which affects respiratory illnesses like asthma and like COVID, as we've seen this year. So the health and safety aspect is that, but it's also that as buildings degrade, if you're not continuing with maintenance, then that can cause other dangerous conditions like indoor air quality or like mold or pests. All of those things are aspects of health that can be addressed by preventative plans for the maintenance of a building. And and as I think we've kind of mentioned before, 70% of greenhouse gas emissions in the city come from buildings, and so it's really important on the level of fighting climate change and keeping our city resilient to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in our multifamily buildings, in our co-ops. And just to go into this a little bit more deeply, I think everybody knows the many effects of COVID-19 and the income gap and the race-based effects. But I think air pollution is a large part of that, and we need to keep that in mind, that the places where air pollution has been the highest are often also the places where people have felt the effects of COVID-19, and that's something that we can contribute in small part to reducing the effects of in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Annika. And really, yeah, reducing the emissions is standing up for the most vulnerable New Yorkers. So it's really
Absolutely.
important to us. Now, I want to talk for a moment about the HDFCs. In the HDFC community, we know that many of your buildings are reliant on oil to heat the building. We know that many of you live in buildings that are older buildings. Often these are buildings in areas that were redlined for decades. Um, Perhaps you went through a city program or a state program. You may have received a gut renovation, but if your co-op had incorporated, kind of on the earlier side of the programs, but to become an HDFC, that may not have happened. So, all in all, there's a real opportunity for us to do more to support the resiliency and health and safety of the folks in the HDFCs. The older building stock means the machinery and the systems that you have are older. There are renewable technologies that you can tap into, that paired with the low cost efficiency upgrades really maximizes the dollars that are invested. And energy efficiency really lowers the financial barrier and lowers the energy burden in communities of color. So we believe that it's really important for us to focus on this, reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and really just make the overall experience of living in the building more comfortable, safe, and better for your residents. So I'll be talking about how your co-op may develop a comprehensive energy plan. And the first step to that is really knowing what's in your building, what's the status of your systems. Um, I'm just going to do an overview, but thinking about the building systems, we can evaluate the opportunities to make them more efficient. So I talked to many HDFC board members, shareholders, folks who, they tell me, oh, the energy efficiency stuff sounds great, but our building's actually pretty good. But there's a lot of factors that may not actually be visible to the eye, or may require a deeper inspection in order to really evaluate and assess whether or not there's an opportunity for efficiency. So we could talk about your roofing, the age of the roof, the condition of the parapet walls. Are there active leaks in your building? Was an insulation layer installed when the roof was installed? If that wasn't the case, at the point of repair or perhaps replacement, that's something that can be considered. Rooftops are really, important, of course, for solar panels as well. So if you are getting a roof replacement, we want to think about the overall planning and timing of all of this so that you can really maximize having these new systems in place. For your heating systems, um, actually, I do. In a moment, I'll launch a poll to ask you more about your heating systems. But whether you use oil, gas, if it's hydronic, steam, one pipe, two pipe, um, is it operating efficiently? Have you gotten it tested? Is it combusting? If there's an oil burner, is it combusting as efficiently as it could be? Is the soot building up and making it operate less efficiently? Do you have heat timers or an energy management system in place that will regulate when it's turning on or off, in terms of that burner? And are you using more oil as a result because you don't have systems like that? If you have an elevator in your building, does it meet some of these new safety regulations that are in place? Does your motor need modernizing or upgrading? And then at the top of the building, is that roof shaft from the elevator covered and insulated? Because if it's not, you're likely losing a lot of heat that your building is paying for. Lighting, many folks have told me they've gotten lighting upgrades, but like if you don't have LEDs in the common areas, or even if you do, having upgrades for timers or motion sensors or bi-level lighting that will go down when no one is in the hallway due to, with the motion sensor detecting the movement. Um, it's important to think about that, because it can actually save thousands of dollars in your HDFC's operating costs. And there are other, more what we call low hanging fruit, things that can be done at a relatively low cost, but actually can maximize the savings for your building, like building envelope and air insulation um, options. But they actually have a bigger impact for your co-op community because it can help improve indoor air quality. And it's important to think about ventilation and insulation. They are very different, but they're both really important. Um, One thing, the heating systems is something that has been coming up more and more and more lately because just the life cycle and life expectancy of the boiler can really range. And if it's not operating efficiently, that can shorten the mechanical life. But it's also coming into focus because of the way that oil is being phased out. I'll talk momentarily about some of the new energy codes coming in, but if some of you were on number 6 oil, you've already moved off of that to either number 4, number 2, or maybe natural gas. And there are more changes coming down the line. So thinking about, how much you are putting into your heating system, it may seem daunting to think about like upgrading the system, but actually, if your system is not operating efficiently and you're having to buy oil very frequently and burn it at in a way that's not efficient, you're spending that money already. So we can talk about how to better spend the funds of your co-op to make sure that the heating is working as best as it can, and also keeping people comfortable. There's a lot of you who've mentioned to us that um, you know the resident on the top floor is too cold and my apartment's too warm and people are opening windows, and so we want to rein in those kinds of situations and really think about how to um, you know make the building much more efficient. um, I'm just going to go over this very briefly. We do have a number of other training classes that address the options for your building if you are, phasing out of one or another type of fuel. Um, but in terms of like heating oil, there's a life expectancy of 15 to 30 years. The different oil types are being phased out. Many people are moving to either natural gas or electrification. Natural gas, you can benefit from additional utility incentives offered by Con Edison or National Grid. It has been cheaper than oil. But on the other hand, natural gas is also going to be phased out within a certain amount of time. The city has indicated that within the next 10 years, they will cease permitting for natural gas installations. So it's the kind of thing that, if you are thinking about a heating system upgrade, it'll be important to think about how to plan accordingly and, not invest the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in a system that actually you're going to have to phase out of in a certain number of years. The option then would be to move to electrification through heat pumps. Now, this is a technology that it's using the air around us to harness heating and cooling. So it's just transferring the heat into a space or transferring it out of a space. You can think of how an air conditioner works. We'll talk about some of the options for this later. But all in all, the bottom line is no matter what systems you have, they must be maintained as efficiently as possible. And if you think that your building is as efficient as it could be, it may be worth looking at it on a deeper level. Like there may be leaks or things behind the walls or kind of under the surface that aren't as visible that we definitely want to be planning towards. So next, I'm going to talk about knowing the compliance timelines. Before I actually move into that, I'm going to take a moment to just I'm curious about the heating fuel, um, and what kind of fuel your HDFC co-op uses to heat the building. So if you don't mind taking just a moment to, if you know, if you don't, you can let us know in the chat. All right, I'm going to give it 10 more seconds. I'm seeing not everyone has voted yet. So I see a few people don't know. That's fine. Um, Someone said they use gas, but number two is a backup intermittently. So that would be dual fuel. So you're switching back and forth. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. So I'm actually seeing that many folks here are on number four oil in their building. So that's interesting. So yeah, we can talk with you about the options to transition off of number four. And looks like number two and natural gas are the other options. And I do hear from a lot of folks that they use number two oil. So yeah, interesting to see this. And thanks everyone. So I want to just talk about the some of the energy codes that have passed. Both New York City and New York State have passed series of codes over time, and they are getting more stringent and really trying to tackle this situation of 70% of the buildings, residential and commercial, releasing the greenhouse gas emissions. So. Uh, so in terms of New York City, it's had different names over time: Greener, Greater Buildings Plan, one NYC. They often refer to it as 80 by 50. That means that there's going to be an 80% reduction from the 2005 levels of our energy usage by the year 2050. The city is taking this very seriously. New York State also has the counterpart, the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act, and that has an even more stringent goal of reduction of 85 by 50. Now, what this means is that both the city and the state are investing in renewable technologies, and so solar, electrification through heat pumps. You'll see cleaner transportation options. All of this is the priority for residential buildings, transportation sector. So this also means, I'm not just talking about heating oil. We also think about hot water as part of that equation as well, because for those of you using number two or number four oil, it's possible that you may be keeping the boiler on all year round. But as we know, through the phase out of the different fuels, um, there are very specific time periods when that's going to be phased out. So these systems are, going to be going away, and then renewable technologies will be what we'll focus on to heat the buildings. But it'll bring increased comfort, but also won't be emitting the kind of greenhouse gases that we've seen with oil. Now, your building, you may be familiar with Local Law 84. This is a benchmarking law, and the series of codes through Greener, Greater Buildings Plan, One New York City, 80 by 50. Like it's culminating in what is translating now to reporting, filing fines for buildings. And so local law 84, it started just for the largest buildings in the city, and they lowered that threshold to 25,000 square feet or above. So if your building's about 25 units or so or larger, um, you are likely to have to benchmark. What that means is you just have to file a report indicating your energy usage. how much electricity you're using, how much fuel you're using, and you get a numerical score, which is now translated into a letter score that has to be posted on the building. The city, uh, was, as they were rolling out and lowering that threshold, they were not fining buildings, but at this point they are fining at every quarter deadline. So if your building is supposed to benchmark and you're not, you're going to be fined up to $2,000 per year. Now, for that cost, actually, it it is well worth it to just tackle the benchmarking and avoid that fine. And what that energy benchmark does is it gives you a baseline. Tells you how much energy you're using, and then sets a standard by which we can try to reduce that in the future. Now, if your building does have to comply with local law 84, then you are likely to have to comply with some of these new local laws under the Climate Mobilization Act in New York City. So if your building is doing repair or large scale replacement of your roof, you will have to consider green roofs and solar panels. Um, Benchmarking. Some of these don't quite affect the HDFCs, but something like Local Law 96 brings PACE financing to make it possible to finance these energy upgrades. But Local Law 97, this is the centerpiece of the Climate Mobilization Act. It has implications for buildings that are above that 25,000 square feet limit. And uh, what it means is that you will have to be focusing on what they're calling a prescriptive path to improve your energy usage. And so once you have that energy benchmark score, like, you will need to take the steps to improve that score. But they are not necessarily requiring the same things of the HDFCs as the average rental building. So it's going to be important, if you do fall into this grouping, for you to stay in touch with us, and we can look at and think about how your building can comply with what you need to. So we'll talk next about the step of accessing resources in developing your energy plan. Now, it's when you're making repairs, like whatever repair you may be making, it's going to be important to think about energy efficiency in that repair. Um, Now, your HDFC co-op is going to gain by investing in the energy efficiency, because as you spend the money, as you are investing in energy efficient repairs, you'll also be saving money. So let's talk about some of the options that are there for you. Um, the good news is that there are funds available for efficiency upgrades. And this is interesting because it may be hard to find money to fix your roof, but you actually can find money to make your roof more energy efficient through insulation. So, there are options of how the project economics may work, but and we can talk about this later. But in terms of efficiency education and advisement, we have a series of training classes. There's all sorts of resources within New York City that we can connect you to provide this information to you. We're not expecting anyone to be, engineers, but we would like to bring you that information so that you can make the most informed decision. One of the best options I can highly recommend to any building is the building operator training. This is it's a 30-hour series of trainings that is hosted by the CUNY, the City University in New York Building Performance Lab. They have them regularly. They were in person. They're now offering them only on a virtual basis. But this is a free 30-hour series. Um, it can bring you 5 to 20% of energy savings just from making minor updates, not even, the large scale system repairs. But as of this year, they now have extended this to all building sizes. So, even if you're in a smaller building, this is open to you. If you're in a larger building, you can send your super or any board members or people that you would consider an operator that wants to learn more about how the building works. It's a really great way to advance one's career if they're interested in superintendent jobs or building kind of operator positions. And I highly recommend this one. The classes are just really valuable. Now, there are lots of incentive programs out there. I mentioned money is flowing for efficiency upgrades, and there are many programs available. And I'm sharing. We will send the slides out to you, so you don't have to worry about jotting down all of these names. This is really to say that there is money available when you're doing work in your building, and like these kinds of upgrades that have lasting value for the comfort and safety of your residents are these programs are out there, and we're happy to get you connected to some of them, um, to the ones that make sense, right? Because they're all a little bit different in its flavors. Um, so I just want to briefly go over a few of them. Um, Now, many of these are funded by you. They're funded by the bills you pay. When you're paying your Con Edison bill or you're paying your utility bills, you pay a systems benefit charge, and that goes to fund these efficiency programs. So, in many senses, you've already paid for these programs, and if you're not using them, you're in effect leaving money on the table. And I this is the same, like when your building is faced with making costly upgrades, I don't want to see anyone leaving money on the table, because it's best to tap into this to lower your overall project costs. Now, the Con Edison Multifamily Energy Efficiency Program is available to electric and gas customers. They have slightly different incentives based on, if you're only an electric customer, if you have natural uh, gas, but you're in Brooklyn territory, National Grid has, counterpart programs. But if you're a Con Edison gas customer, you're eligible for some additional programs, as well as if you're in certain regions, like certain parts of Brooklyn, or if you have certain upgrades that you want to do, like lighting or elevator modernization, like there are resources that can come back to you. And many of these programs work on an incentive basis, where you do the work and then you can collect a rebate or an incentive, um, as long as you meet a certain level of energy savings. But again, if this is work that your building's already doing, you should recapture that money. Now, one thing I really recommend is an energy audit. This looks at all of your major building systems. It looks at how efficient, how much energy is wasted. It looks at how well things are running, how comfortable or not comfortable people are in the building. Now, what's great about this Nyserda Flex Tech program is it brings you an energy audit, but as of this year, something they extended from last year, they're covering up to 100% of the cost share of an energy audit. So, based on if your building is going to be actually doing work, you can get this energy audit and then have that cost covered. There are certain limits. It's based on you actually doing work after you get the audit. So it's not just a matter of getting the audit and then putting it down. Once you do the work, they will cover up to 100% of that cost. Um, and so the incentives do depend on like what it is you're doing, and that's also the case for NYSERDA. NYSERDA stands for New York State Energy Research Development Authority. They have a program called Multifamily Performance Program, MPP. Based on the energy savings that you attain, they will give you money back. So you can get anything from 700 to 3,500 per unit for your building. So if you're planning, roof work, boiler work, you definitely want to tap into these programs, because again, you already funded to pay for these programs, and then this can really be effective in lowering the overall costs for you. So I'm going to just take a pause there and see if there are any questions. Um, and I see Edwin, if you have any issues joining, please give us a call. We can make sure that you're not having any tech issues. But are there any questions? Feel free to use the chat or to unmute yourself and ask your question.
I think Edwin made it in, and I noticed that there was one question from Howard. He asked in the chat, what is considered a roof replacement? What if you were just putting a new insulation and membrane? Will you be required to put on solar panels?
Yeah, and I can answer that. So that's from local laws 92 and 94, and it's really an extensive change to the structure of the roof. So if you're replacing the membrane, that wouldn't trigger it. It's if you're like adding another story or like adding a penthouse or something like that, that would really dramatically affect the roof. So other than that, solar is merely recommended, but not required.
Great. Are there any other questions? One thing that I wanted to ask before we move on um, is about what kind of repair priorities your building has, your board or your shareholders, for the coming year. You can pick as many of these as you'd like. It looks like not everyone has voted yet, so I'm going to leave this open just a little bit longer. And we'll give it just 15 more seconds. And also just checking if anyone else has any questions. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for sharing. It looks like there are a lot of plans for boiler and heating system upgrades. Glad to see some folks are interested in solar. Um, and yeah, pretty good distribution of the different types of repair options. Okay, great. Yeah, seeing no more questions, I'm going to pass it to Annika, um, who will talk about the Co-ops Go Solar campaign.
Yeah, so UHub and Solar One have been working together to help HDFC co-ops get solar for, I believe, 4 years now, maybe more actually. The idea is that solar, as we said before, can really benefit HDFCs. Rooftop solar can pay for itself in less than 10 years, so between 4 and 8 years on average. And it lasts for at least 25 years. So it can really reduce your ongoing expenses for the co-op, and it can make a big difference in your operating expenses. So what we can do through the Co-ops Go Solar campaign is we can do a free assessment of whether your building is worth going solar, if it has any viability. We can do workshops like this. We have a whole workshop series about solar specifically, and we can come to board meetings or shareholder meetings and answer questions that way. And we can also talk to you about your financing options, what kind of incentives you'd be eligible for. And if the co-op decides that it wants to go solar, we can help you do a competitive bidding process to find a good installer who will do the work for a cheap, reasonable price. And then as the installation is going forward, we kind of act as a consumer advocate to make sure that the installer actually does what they say they'll do. So all of that is part of the Co-ops Go Solar campaign currently. And just recently, we also launched a portion of it to do community solar, which is where you sign up for kind of like a solar farm somewhere else in the city. And I'll talk about that more later. So very quickly, solar, how solar works, it takes energy from the sun and it converts it into electricity. Anything that isn't used immediately on site by whatever is using power right then is sent back to the grid, and then the utility pays you at like a 1-for-1 level for that electricity. And so then you can use those credits that you get on your bill at night when the sun goes down, you're not producing power. from the solar, but you're using energy because you've like all turned on your TVs and so forth. So over time, it evens out that you produce a lot of power during the day and then you use a lot of power at night, and it all shows up on your bill as a negative cost. So I want to talk a little bit about the different ways that you can save money with solar. First of all, there's a lot of incentives. I won't go into all of them in detail, but there's a federal and state tax credit that the co-op shareholders can receive. There's a property tax abatement that goes directly to the co-op. And there's the New York Sun incentive, which just reduces the upfront cost completely. So after all of those incentives, you're only paying, 20 to 30% of the original system cost. And in some cases, you can't take all of the incentives. For example, they can reduce your bill, your tax bill to zero, but not below zero. So if you're already paying zero taxes, like if all of your property taxes are abated, you can't take more property tax abatement. But this cash flow on the screen shows a co-op without any of the tax incentives. The solar still pays for itself in 8 years and saves them over $100,000 over the lifetime of the system. So it can be very beneficial. So now I want to talk about offsite community solar, which is kind of a different way of participating in solar in the city. You can subscribe to a solar array somewhere else in New York. Usually it's on a warehouse. Often they're in the Bronx and Queens, some of the more industrial areas of the city. And you can sign up for free. It's a subscription that gives you a 10% discount on your electricity bill. So it's not a huge savings, but it's also no cost whatsoever. There's nothing that you do that will increase cost at any point. You're just reducing your bill, and you're supporting solar in New York City to be built. So solar panels, if we look at the diagram, solar panels are installed somewhere on a warehouse. That electricity is sent to Con Edison. Con Edison gives the credits that the solar produces to you as the subscriber, and then you pay for the credits that you've received at that 10% discount. So you always get a discount on your electricity. And then it's ongoing, but there's no cancellation fee if you decide that you want to stop, or if you move out of New York City, out of the New York City area or something. So this can be a really great opportunity to either include, many times buildings will install solar on their roof and that will offset their common area charges, but it won't offset the individual units bills. So you could have solar on your roof for the co-op and then community solar for the apartments. Or if your co-op is interested in going solar, but it's probably going to take a couple years to get it up and running, you can sign up for community solar in the meantime. And then once your solar system on your roof is up and running, you can cancel the community solar subscription. So it can work really well in tandem with on-site community, with solar on your roof. And in some cases, solar just isn't a good idea for a co-op, and in that case, offsite community solar can be a really good option as well. So UHAB is working with Solstice on a project that's actually quite exciting. They are just finishing installing solar on the roofs of NYCHA buildings, and it's specifically to help New Yorkers take advantage of this community solar. So if you are interested in community solar, you can reach out to UHAB and be part of the NYCHA Community Solar Project, which should be going online later on this spring. So Clara Weinstein is the person to talk to for that.
Great. Thanks so much, Annika. I am going to talk a little bit about one of our other really exciting programs that we're just launching, our Clean Heat for Co-op campaign. UHAB is launching a campaign to help HDFCs upgrade their heating systems from fossil fuels, and this can be a lot. It's a big change for a lot of buildings, especially if you've been on oil or gas for quite a while. So we're here to sort of walk you through it. Two of our reasons of sort of why Clean Heat for Co-ops. One is to improve the energy efficiency of your home and reduce the amount of energy needed for heating and cooling. You save not only energy savings from switching to electric and doing clean heat, but also you reduce the amount of energy that you're actually using. And the other part is to install cheaper and cleaner solutions for heating and cooling your home. And I can get into that in just a minute. Next slide. So there are two main systems that you have in your buildings that use heat. Most of you are familiar. You have your space heating and you have your domestic hot water. So on the space heating side, current system probably for most oil burning buildings is going to look like steam heat that moves into radiators to heat homes during the winter time. And on the flip side of that, with the clean heating program, you would be replacing that system with a ductless air source heat pump. So if you look on the bottom left hand of this slide, you'll see the radiator on the one hand. On the other side, that's what an air source heat pump looks like in your building. If you've been to newer buildings recently, you might have seen these. They're also used as air conditioner units, which is basically the way that a heat pump system works. It's just pulling, air out of your, it's replacing one system of air with the other. So the warm air goes in and the cool air goes out, or the reverse if you're using air conditioning. And on the other flip side of that is your domestic hot water system. So this would be your gas or oil powered boiler. And under our current system, probably your boiler is going to heat that water for hot water all year round, using it to use for that hot water. But on the flip side, with a heat pump for hot water, you would have this system on the bottom right hand here that saves energy. And I can get into it a little bit more on the next slide, illustrating sort of how this system works and how it's different from your current system. So what it probably looks like in many buildings at the moment is that you have your water heater and your space heater used year round from January all the way through December. Your boiler is used to heat both the space and the water, and it means that it has to be on year round. However, with a clean heating, a heat pump system, you get these summer savings. So your heating system usage, you're still going to be using that heating for water and space heating, but in the summer when you're not going to need that sort of energy output in the same way, you get savings. And so that's really briefly about our clean heating and cooling program, which we can get into more in the questions. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit is that, these energy projects are daunting. We've just gone through a ton of information. We've talked about a lot of different compliance timelines. We've talked about a lot of different programs, a lot of different building systems. And this is the part about sort of, where do we start? How do I, as a board member, navigate this within my building? How do we pay for it? How do we answer some of those questions? So the first things that I want folks to start to ask about, and these are questions you can probably answer today, if not today, maybe this week, is that, are there projects that can gain community support, like upgrading hallway lights? We find that a lot of buildings, if they have boards or community members who are a little reticent to get involved in doing a lot of energy programs, you can start with something easy. There's basically a 100% rebate for a lot of lighting systems. Replacing with LED bulbs is a really easy energy upgrade. So start with something small and you can move from there. And then there's the question of, where are the repair priorities of shareholders? Maybe if you're having sort of back and forth in your board and you're saying, hey, we need a new boiler, there are heating system upgrades that we need to be doing, let's be thinking about our compliance timeline, maybe we want to upgrade our system, and people are really, really fixated on, it's too hot in my unit, it's too cold in my unit, or, there's something else that's going on, then it's maybe sort of reconciling those priorities and thinking about, where can we meet folks where they're at, and how do we explain, maybe if there's inconsistent heat in the building, that this is a boiler problem, or, if there are insulation needs, this is also part of the issue. And we can sort of work from that starting point based on where people are feeling like they really need these upgrades in their building. And then there's sort of the broad question of like, how do we fit these priorities into an overall building repair plan? We want to have HDFCs have a plan for the next 10, 20 years to keep your buildings healthy, to keep your buildings sustainable, and to keep them going. And part of that, what's going to factor in is knowing what those code compliance concerns or the local laws that are going to need to be met, like we've reviewed a little bit earlier. Next slide, please. So I want to ask sort of folks to ask themselves what they're moving towards. We really encourage boards to make a multi-year capital plan. And a lot of this starts with budgeting. You're going to start with what you're doing every year, making a budget on an annual basis. And in that budget, not thinking about only your current system needs, but also your anticipated needs. Is your roof, your boiler, your plumbing, what's at the end of its useful life or nearing the end of its useful life? What could use an upgrade? What has been sort of needing many repairs recently? Should we be thinking about something else? And from there, you can kind of sort to develop a scope of what are the upgrades that we need. Do we need to replace the system, or are we okay to repair it? How many more years can we repair something before it needs to have a full replacement? And to do this, you can work with partners and vendors, contractors to get bids and proposals that factor back into that annual budget and tell you sort of how something like this how much it might cost, how long it's going to take to do these type of replacements. Heating system repairs, you're not going to want to do that during heating systems. So when is the right time to be using some of those incentives and taking advantage of those upgrades? And then also, like Emily mentioned before, that energy audit we find to be really, really useful for buildings and telling folks sort of not only what you need, maybe it's going to confirm sort of your own assumptions, like this is a particular system that we need to be upgraded or fixed completely, but what else is there that we should be thinking about long term? Maybe you're not thinking about the facade, but an energy audit is going to say, hey, there are a couple issues here that you might want to be addressing, not immediately, but in the long term, or there's going to be an unexpected need that comes up. And a lot of these get factored into sort of that work. If you do larger repairs, a lot of times you can sort of get these energy audits or other things, depending on the program, to sort of pay for themselves throughout the process. And so on the bottom here, we have sort of a timeline of what does it look like from here until sort of like the near future? And in the short term, that looks like becoming more energy efficient, saving money, reducing energy consumption, cutting those costs where you can. And then down the line, are there larger repairs? Maybe those major systems are nearing the end of their useful life. Is that a new roof, boiler, windows? And then maybe down the line, you want to think about, we can do something that can really offset costs and sort of provide an asset to our building and our community. Does that look like solar or heat pumps, these programs that we've been working on? And in sort of the long term, it's how do we combat climate change as a community? How do we do better for ourselves and our neighbors? And what does that look like going forward? So on the sort of financial side, because I know the big picture, what do we want? What does this mean going forward is always, well, how do we actually pay for it? How do we get these things done? And so if this is something that, you're feeling like you're coming up against, and there are a lot of savvy boards who have this down and know exactly what they need, exactly how much it's going to cost. And that's great. That's fantastic. If you're having some of those questions about, how do we pay for this? I'm not really sure. I'd advise you to look through sort of income collection and your expenses. Maybe this sounds really simple, but it can be helpful to know, how is maintenance and rent collection? You have commercial income. How is that coming in? The pandemic has changed circumstances for a lot of folks, and we want to make sure to factor that in when you're thinking about making these upgrades. Maybe if you need a little bit of cash and there's a vacant apartment, maybe this is a good time to move forward with a sale, and that can finance at least a little bit of the repairs that you want to be making, or give you an extra cushion to be able to do the work that you need to do. This is also about looking at the condition of your operating reserves, your vacancy reserves, and your repair and maintenance reserves to see how much money you have allocated towards towards these things? How much is coming in? How much do you have stored? How much is there to really work off of without needing additional outside financing? And then there's the flip side of the expenses. So a lot of buildings, there are issues with arrears or fines and penalties. Is it easy to sort of clear some of those things away? Are these also pointing back towards issues that are coming up in the larger buildings? Sometimes recurring fines can be resulted from, you know, systems that have consistent problems, and that it just piles up over time. And doing energy repairs and really making these efficient upgrades can help with that. And then also you want to be looking at what are those big expenses for your co-op. If a lot of those big expenses are your utility bills, then energy upgrades are not only going to make your building sort of work better for longer and become more sustainable, but they're also going to cut those costs and save you money long term. And that's important when thinking relative to your building size. We can sort of talk through that. And within those expenses, you know, that's the place to think about what costs could we cut. If energy is one of the big ones, then that's something where these upgrades can help quite a bit. And if you're sort of looking at this picture and you say, hey, for my co-op, maybe that doesn't make sense. I'm not, you know, maybe we have a lot of taxes, or, you know, we owe some money, where we're behind on some things. We don't have a ton in the operating, you know, we need to do this work, but I'm not totally sure how. You know, there are a lot of options, a lot of program incentives to take advantage of right now, like Emily and Annika were both explaining, and keeping your building maintained is a non-negotiable. You want to avoid that deferred maintenance scenario in which you push things off until it gets so bad that, you know, all of this stuff piles up. We want to stay on top of what we need to do for the building to keep things healthy and maintained and upgraded. And then we can come back to sort of making those determinations between the physical building needs and what the shareholders want, and seeing if there's a happy medium there. And then we have a lot of low-cost financing options through Nyserda, through NYSEG, through Habitat, HPD, lots of different programs that we can talk through, some that we've mentioned already, some that we're happy to get into a one-on-one conversation with you all about if you're interested. And like, I think something really important that Emily mentioned earlier is that a lot of these programs are programs that you are paying into already. They are literally money that your tax money and that your Con-Ed bill goes towards. And so you actually lose money if you don't take advantage of some of these programs because you've already paid into them. So even if the upfront cost seems like it's more than you would be willing to shell out otherwise, it's important to understand that this is also money that you've already been paying towards, and really getting this back is getting a rebate on what you've already been sort of working towards. So that's it. That's it from me. We've been talking for a long time, so I want to open up the room for questions.
Yeah, it looks like we've been getting a lot of really interesting questions throughout the presentation. So I look forward to discussing these. I see one from, I think, just after the last questions section. So sorry we missed you before, Edwin. But, oh wait, no, Edwin, you were asking about the slides, sending the slides. Just a reminder, we'll be sending these slides and a recording of the presentation afterwards so that you, you all can review it. Howard asked about whether solar makes sense on mid or high-rise buildings. You posited that it doesn't reduce as much greenhouse gases as, say, insulating the exterior of a building. I don't actually know how much greenhouse gases can be reduced by insulating the exterior of a building, but I think it's pretty safe to say that in order to fight climate change, we're going to have to do all of the above. I've been working with a number of buildings that are working towards net zero, and they do, you know, insulating the exterior, they do electrification, they do efficiency measures as much as they can, and then they also do solar to generate energy so that none of the energy is taken from the gas plants in the state. So it's really important to do both. But certainly it's good to see whether solar is a particularly good fit for your building versus other things that you're considering.
Right. And I would also add, I think gone are the days where when you're making these decisions about repairs, where it's an either or scenario, right? Um, and some of the HDFCs we've worked with over the years, like one year they were working on the heating system, and then the next year they were working on windows, and just over time doing that piecemeal actually is costlier. Whereas with some of these programs, if you're actually bundling that work, you're getting an energy audit, you're bundling the work, you're actually able to get a better rate on the labor for certain things because depending on how you're doing the contracting and hiring. um and and then in terms of the incentives, so I think whereas it was very commonplace for people to do these piecemeal repairs, I think now we're viewing this more holistically in terms of the building. And it very well may be that, one measure is not going to tackle the greenhouse gas emissions, but it may tackle the health and safety. It may tackle the comfort question. And so, I think looking at all of these pieces together is really important. And then I've also seen many buildings where they had costly elevator upgrades, but actually, you know what? When they put solar on their rooftop, the elevator, upgrade wasn't so bad because they were getting such savings from the solar, and so I think by thinking about the planning of the work, um, and kind of longer term, it's possible to really be more efficient in how you're investing and spending the co-op's money. Um, and that the other example of like the heating systems, like if you if you're upgrading to a system which you then have to phase out of and upgrade again to another system, or preventing situations where you're deferring the maintenance, as Ariel mentioned, like if you're just putting it off from one year to the next, hoping that the boiler will continue another year, and then I have seen buildings get into situations where all of a sudden they have an emergency boiler, and it's not just a matter of like you didn't have money to make that upgrade, but then also having these added costs, and penalties in the case where if the city had to get involved. So it's going to be really important to think about this kind of with the longer term, bigger picture, for the planning of your building, because overall, it will be efficient in more ways than just the energy efficiency, but also the cost efficiency. So we also have a question here about doing maintenance on the boiler and cleaning the coils of the tubes heating water, um, and whether Con Edison subsidizes boiler cleaning. They do subsidize boiler cleaning for gas buildings. For oil buildings, their multifamily energy efficiency program does not. However, there may be other options that we can connect you with, that would address the boiler cleaning if you are an oil burner boiler building. I'm just going through the chat. Community solar seems to make more sense, but can it work for mid rises? We use a lot of energy.
Yeah, community solar is works for pretty much any residential account. So as long, yeah, basically anyone in a multifamily building who isn't like a commercial account can subscribe to community solar. And even if you use a lot of energy, the solar farms, that the large solar projects that are installed, I can promise create more than any individual apartments, a lot of energy use. And so people can subscribe to that. And there's quite a few community solar arrays throughout the city. So if a single building uses a lot, you could subscribe to multiple different community solar facilities and get it all that way.
Great. I see that Dabney asked, with heat pump system, there's savings in warmer months when the heat's not needed, but wouldn't the air conditioning cost take the place of the savings during the summer, or negate the savings? It sounds like is the question. Um, Now the cold climate heat pumps that also have a cooling component are super efficient. It's not like the heat pumps of yesteryear. And just in terms of the air exchange, like they are some of the most efficient options. I think in terms of the savings, like I I think we have to do more like cost analysis, and that's something that we can work with your building if you're trying to cost out what it looks like. But chances are, I would wonder if, well, first off, like if everyone in the building is using air conditioning, and with the kind of extreme temperatures that we're facing now, it's also a question of making sure people have access to air conditioning, right? Because the high temperatures and um, the urban heat islands that some of our co-ops are in, means that there are very severe temperatures that can affect especially vulnerable populations like seniors or um, folks with medical conditions. And you could see, like in the pandemic, like it was hard to have the kind of cooling centers open. So what this also gives you is an option to address some of the other health and safety. I don't believe that the cost would be negating the kind of savings that you would get because of of how efficient these heat pump units are, and the way that in the design, when if working with your building, we could figure out with the engineers that we partner with, like what is the appropriate number of units to have in your apartment, because that's not going to be the same from one building to another. It really depends on how the rooms are placed, but chances are you're not able to have air conditioners in every single room of your apartment, or kind of zoning it in a way that makes it more efficient for you. So I would say that there are benefits that, you know, and relative to cost, like we we are looking at like how incentives can bring overall costs down. So I don't have that much information about the specific costs to speak to that, but I overall, like I'm saying, like, don't worry about the savings being negated because the efficiency of and the benefits of the units overall will bring um, additional comfort and benefits to your building.
I also want to clarify that those were two slightly different ways of increasing your efficiency. So heat pumps are one thing that you can do, but another thing that you can do, regardless of whether you do heat pumps, is switching your hot water heating from being coupled with your heating boiler to being its own hot water system. And that's the thing where you get those summer savings because you're not using the boiler throughout the year. So you can do one of those without the other, or you can do both.
Right. Thank you, Annika. Howard had a question about the penalties for not complying with the Climate Mobilization Act, and how they really need to be considered in whatever anyone does, whether it's down the line or now. Um, I think there's been a lot about the penalties that have been stated. There is a calculator that the city has made available to input some information for your building and then see what kind of penalties you may be faced with for not complying. Um, I think generally what I am seeing is, regardless of the codes, like I want every HDFC to think about the kind of work, the energy efficiency work that we're talking about, because regardless of the codes, like your building may be smaller and not actually have to comply with the codes, but your building is likely to, one of those that would benefit the most from having efficient measures put into your building because of the sheer cost savings. When it comes to the actual fines for Climate Mobilization Act, I think it's a little bit on par with what we see with workers' compensation, where like if you have a staff person and you don't have workers' comp insurance coverage, the fines, it increases at a like tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars very quickly. And what the agency hopes for is that you just get the coverage, and then you can avoid the fines. And I think in the case of the Climate Mobilization Act, like the penalties are there, but it's also because relative to the fact that 70% of the buildings in our city are are sorry, that all of the buildings in our city are the ones releasing 70% of all the greenhouse gas emissions in our city. That is significant. And of course, you can think, oh, office buildings will account for a lot of that, but no, of course, it's the residential buildings where we live, and now we are working from our homes, and um for those of us who aren't essential workers. And so it is very, very significant. And so for your building to actually do some of those, attending like building operator training and putting in some of these measures that will save you 5 to 20% on your energy bills already. Like, there are very simple things that you can do to comply with the CMA without it having to be like a costly investment. But then there are other things that, like, it may be worth considering. I don't want to rule out putting solar on the rooftop if there's a really good benefit for the community. And not every building can benefit from that. So it's something that, we really want your HDFC to identify, like, what your situation is, where the opportunities are, and really take that into consideration. Because it's not just a matter of like, we're spending too much here. Like, chances are you're spending too much somewhere, and we want to kind of, equal that out, if that makes sense. Um, I see a question about UHAB's assistance with energy laws and local law 84 and 97. So if your building has to benchmark, we actually have a series of trainings coming up. I can put the links. Sorry, I'm going to momentarily stop sharing my screen. I'm going to put the links into the chat, but we have we partner with the Sustainability Help Center, which is a division of the City University's Building Performance Lab. They have a how to benchmark training series. And it's a 3-hour series that's going to take place um, March 9th, 16th, and 23rd. And UHAB is co-hosting this. But if you're interested in the benchmarking and how to do it, it's something that you can do yourself. You can also, hire someone to do it. UHAB has a very affordable service if you need assistance to do that. We do believe that, someone from the building who's tech savvy and has a computer can do this on behalf of the building at no cost. Um, there are also lots of managers and other companies, engineering firms, that offer these services at a cost that really ranges. But if you have questions about it, I encourage you to register for that series. If your building has already filed, there's a separate training class for you, and I can send that link with the slides when I share everything. And hopefully that answers your question, Tree, about the local law 8497. New York City also has their accelerator program. UHAB and Solar One are both partners of that program. And there is energy advisement that can be offered if you know, need assistance just navigating all of the codes. So I would say check in with UHAB, know that there are city resources available to you, both online and, like, via a person. So Desiree mentioned that the gas has been turned off due to a gas leak. Is there anyone that can assist with a grant or low cost financing to cover the repairs? And they were quoted $100,000 for that. Desiree, we should maybe chat offline, because I think it's, yeah, very specific situations when it comes to like gas and gas leaks and gas safety. So if you want to maybe message me with your contact information, um, we we can we can follow up directly about that. And
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. And those are the only questions I see. But we do have some more time if there are other questions that have come up or that anyone else would like to ask. And please feel free to unmute yourself and ask us, or you can use the chat if you'd like. Well, Oh, go ahead, Annika.
I was just going to say, we are planning a number of other trainings throughout the spring on solar and on financial literacy and other sorts of things. So if there are other things that you'd like to learn more about, please let us know. We're happy to continue doing these trainings. We want to make sure that everyone has all of the information that they can to make the best decisions for their co-ops and be informed.
Yeah, we have a new class on community solar. So if you are interested, or if you think some of your fellow shareholder neighbors are interested, we'll share the dates and information for that. You also can visit UHAB's website for our calendar. And I'm also going to just put the job posting. We have a position open for a Spanish-speaking training project associate. So I'm going to put that chat into that link into the chat. So you please share that with your community. And then also the link for our calendar. But I'll stick around to 7:30 if anyone else has questions or wants to speak. But I thank you all for coming and being here with us this evening. For those of you that have number 4 oil, please stay in touch. We'll send an email out, so I'll include the contact information for all of us, and as well as the slides. And yeah, would love to keep the conversations going with you about what your building is facing and what your needs are.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Have a good night.
We got one last question of whether we help only HDFC co-ops. Emily, you want to answer that first?